weight. Whether you think of her from a political standpoint, you think of her from an economic standpoint, you think of her from a cultural dimension, you think of her from a technological dimension, you think of her from a sporting dimension, there is a sense in which we never quite realize our potential. And of course, when we find ourselves in a situation such as this, we have no shortage of excuses and reasons that we can ascribe to our plight. But I think there is a sense in which we ourselves, as the indigents of Africa, are also co-authors of our own misfortune. Whether we can say there is the 400 years of slavery or the nearly 100 years of colonization and the succeeding nearly 60 years of neo-colonization, there is a sense in which we have found ourselves in a situation where we have no faith in ourselves. Our levels of esteem are such that we doubt ourselves so very much and so very fundamentally that even the things that we ought to do, we don't do. And the COVID-19 has served to expose our underbelly, that when we found ourselves confronted with this pandemic, when we examined our hospitals, we found those hospitals wanting. The entire continent of Africa has fewer ICU beds than the country of Germany. When we found ourselves in terms of the hospital beds, we have fewer beds in the entire continent of Africa than there are beds in Spain. And when we found ourselves needing ambulances, we discovered that we have fewer ambulances than the entire country, than the country of Italy. When we found ourselves wanting for ventilators, we discovered that South Korea has more ventilators than all African countries combined. And when we were hungry for masks, we discovered that we didn't even make masks, and that Jack Ma from China had to give us masks. And it's only after that that we started discovering that we could very well make them. So that my kinsman, whom I've quoted so very often, Ali Mazrui, was very right and remains as right as he was in 1980s, that Africa produces what it does not consume and consumes what it does not produce. But we cannot afford the luxury of resting on our laurels. We cannot afford the luxury of engaging in perpetual lamentation. I think that we can now, in the midst of COVID, recognize that this is an opportunity that we can seize. And I hope that this time round, we will not be accused of never being in the business, never being out of the business of missing an opportunity to miss an opportunity.
All right, now let's go into the questions, because I know a lot of people are watching us right now and they're waiting for their questions to be answered. In no order, I just had to grab some from Twitter, some from Facebook, just for you to, some people were saying that Professor has been lecturing, but we need our questions to be answered. So this is an opportunity for some of these questions to be answered. So someone says, please ask, oh, well, I am from Zimbabwe. So obviously most of the people that I engage with on Twitter, on Facebook are from Zimbabwe. Please ask him, why do we have bad leadership like we have in Zimbabwe in this day and age? Why do African leaders subject their citizens to such a degree of suffering?
Let me say that number one, the wisdom that obtains in the world is that the people get the leaders that they deserve. Which
can
means,
you repeat that, Professor?
Yeah, that we get the leaders that we deserve. We Africans have demonstrated consistently that when we are given an opportunity to elect individuals through the voting process, we elect men and women who promises bridges to be built where there are no rivers. They promise us the sun, they promise us things, and we clap for them at public rallies. That is criteria number one, that we are very susceptible to manipulation. Number two, we have also demonstrated that when we are called upon to elect men and women into office, particularly because of our multi-ethnic nature, we are quick to choose people on the basis of our ethnic affiliation rather than the basis of the content of their character and their ability to deliver. And that is true of Zimbabwe as it is true in Zambia, as it is true in Kenya, or indeed in any other country. Of course, those who are listening to my answer will say, but they rig the elections. But even when they rig the elections, if they do, we do not come out in a sustained and sustainable manner to send a clear message. We have seen in other parts of the world, if you saw what happened, for example, in the Arab Spring, and in answering my question, I'm now making a distinction between the sub-Saharan Africa and the Maghreb. You saw when the Arab North was dissatisfied with their leadership in Tunisia, they came out and the leaders went. They came out in Egypt and the leaders went. They came out in Algeria and the leaders went. In Africa, except for Burkina Faso, in the recent past, we have not demonstrated that we have the ability to do so. And in the countries where we have had change of leaders, whenever there has been mismanagement, we have seen it has been through armed struggle. That is how Mobutu Sese Seko was removed. That is how the genocidal regime in Rwanda was removed. That is how the Deg regime in Ethiopia of Mengistu Haile Mariam was removed. That is how Idi Amin was removed. But when it is left to the population is so docile, and the political leaders in Africa have recognized that our docility is our weakness, and therefore they can do anything they like with us. And when they find it fit, then they manipulate us on the basis of our ethnic affiliation. So we are co-authors of our own misfortune.
All right, like I said, I'm going to be asking these questions in no order. There's also a question on COVID-19. What are your views on Madagascar COVID-19 medicine that all African leaders are ignoring to talk or give them a chance as fellow African country?
I think what has happened with President Rajuel and the Madagascar people is something that has to be commended. I personally have gone out and said that that is something that ought to be appreciated and supported. What the people of Madagascar are saying that we have discovered something that we hold the view is capable of dealing with COVID-19. The World Health Organization is asking, does it conform to the protocol that have been prescribed by the World Health Organization? But let us ask ourselves, who prescribes these protocols? It is Pfizer, which is a pharmaceutical company. It is Novartis, which is a pharmaceutical company. It is Johnson & Johnson, which is a pharmaceutical company. It is Roche, which is a pharmaceutical company. Why is it that when an African country discovers something, we don't scrutinize and we don't ask the question as to whether it can be potent? If indeed the Madagascans have discovered something, what we need to do is to ask ourselves, if they have made baby steps, what can we do by dint of research in our universities and other research institutions to ensure that that particular concoction achieves the levels which are acceptable? And I'm very happy with the people of Equatorial Guinea and the people of Guinea-Bissau and now Tanzania, who have come out and said we are going to try it. Because in any event, all these drugs that we consume so very gleefully from the West, the material, the raw material that is used as extracts are actually from Africa, among other places. So it is quite possible, and I have no doubt in my mind that what is being peddled by the people of Madagascar deserves scrutiny. To dismiss it offhand as we are doing is one of the things that we Africans like to do, to embrace with our folded hands that which comes from the West, India, and other parts of the world, and to deride and to dismiss that which is from the continent of Africa. I'm also very happy with the Oni of Ife in Nigeria, who has also recommended that we ought to look into herbal medicine. And in this regard, even the government of Zimbabwe has gone out and said that that is one of the things that we ought to do. And is also not lost, or the cabinet secretary for health in Kenya has also encouraged our premier institution in medical research to work with herbalists towards finding herbal medicine for COVID-19.
Okay, then another question that I got here, that why can't you offer mentorship to fellow African presidents?
First of all, what I do is to share my thoughts.
I'm just a messenger.
And the beauty of it is that I've had conversations with quite a number of heads of state, and some of them are very interesting. As to whether they agree with me is another debate. But I've had conversations with them. They know what my views are. I'll not name them because they did not give me the authority to name them, but they know themselves.
No, you can tell me off camera.
and they know some of my views about overstaying in power. They know my views about conducting credible elections. They know my views about having African solutions for African problems. And some of them, and now I'll name them because I don't need their permission to do this. There are quite a number of African leaders who I think, whether we agree or disagree with them, are doing good work. I think that President Paul Kagame is doing good work, whether one likes him or not. He's been in power for 25 years post-genocide, but I think that there are certain good things that are happening in that part of the world. I think Prime Minister Abiy in Ethiopia is doing some good work.
Before you go to the next one, on President Paul Kagame, there is a question here that it's not everything that meets the eye. Like, there is a lot that is happening behind the scenes, that security-wise, there's a lot of issues. He's a dictator. So what's your comment on that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I remember at one time, I want to anticipate the question that the questioner is going to ask. I was at a forum, and this is the question that was posed to me, that are you not in the business of supporting dictators? Your friends are Paul Kagame,
yes,
Kakuta Museveni, Joseph Magufuli. And this was my response. Let us not confuse discipline with dictatorship. And with regard to Rwanda, I posed the question because the gentleman who asked me the question was from Rwanda. I asked him, don't answer your question without having context. 25 years ago, you had genocide and people were killed and the dead bodies littered the streets of Kigali. Therefore, when one is called upon to administer a nation such as that, there is a sense in which certain things must be done in a particular way. But in as much as we say that certain things have been compromised, and there are no shortage of books that have been written against President Kagame, but I'm saying, let us look at the evidence on the ground. What did President Kagame inherit in 1994? Pessimists and Afro-pessimists had written the obituary of Rwanda. Within 25 years in my own lifetime, today, when we want to talk about a country where the human indices of development have moved in the positive direction, Rwanda is the country that we talk about. When we want to talk about countries where the deployment of technology in education and agriculture and health has been used to good effect, Rwanda is in the right direction. Does it mean that Paul Kagame is a saint? No, he is not. Like all of us, He will make mistakes. It is the great philosopher Saint Just who said, nobody can govern guiltlessly. So I want to tell the people who are saying that there are those issues. That is why democracy demands the eternal vigilance of the population. If the Kagame regime is engaged in any excesses, we ought to engage the regime with the confidence that opens with their eyes, not with the arrogance that inflames their anger. I think that on a scale of 1 to 10, if I'm asked to judge President Paul Kagame, I would say he has done a good job. Should he now think of leaving office? Yes, he should. And he himself is already talking of leaving office. Because as my good mentor, Julius Kambarage Nyerere used to say, you are not successful until your successor succeeds. And I would love to see President Paul Kagame out of office with another president who follows in his path and corrects his mistake. Then President Kagame will be called successful. On President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, I have had a conversation with President Museveni on this point. I told him, Your Excellency, I remember in your younger days, you used to say that part of the African problem is that leaders remain in office for too long. And now you're
That's what they say.
Longer than necessary. And is a conversation that I would still want to hold with President Museveni. I too wish that President Museveni now thinks of an exit strategy, because whether you like President Museveni or not, ask yourself, what country did he inherit? And what do we have in Uganda now? So that when we are quick, critics, like Roosevelt used to say, critics live between the twilight of victory and defeat. Their only claim to fame is that they are professional fault finders, never doing anything other than criticizing. I never criticize, I critique. And there is a big difference between criticism for its own sake and critiquing with a view to having the person you are critiquing changing for the better. And of course, John Pombe Magufuli, who has been in government and in power and is seeking re-election this year, has also made certain controversial decisions. But there is a sense in which, on a scale of 1 to 10, I still give him 7. So in a nutshell, whenever I speak about the Kagames of this world, the Musevenis of this world, the Nana Dankwa Addo Akufo-Addos of this world, the Abiy Ahmeds of this world, I'm not saying that they are angels of any kind. I'm merely saying that they are trying their best, they make mistakes, and it's our duty as those who are votaries of democracy to remain vigilant and to remind them when they are engaged in excesses.
Have you had a conversation with the current president of Zimbabwe, President Mnangagwa?
No. The first time, in fact, when I met President Mnangagwa was when he was the Minister for Justice.
Oh, that's long ago.
When he was the Minister for Justice, I was in Zimbabwe, and that is when I had conversation. Actually, we were in one panel. Now that he has become the president, now his memory may not serve him very well on matters as mundane as such. But I believe that Zimbabwe finds ourselves in a very unique position. If you permit me to enlarge your question.
Yes, definitely. The floor is yours.
Yeah, let me enlarge your question. Zimbabwe finds ourselves in a very unique position. I remember in the run-up to the departure of Ian Smith, Julius Kambarage Nyerere and Robert Gabriel Mugabe were sitting in one room. And Kambarage Nyerere told Robert Gabriel Mugabe, you have inherited a jewel. Handle the jewel like one must handle a jewel, carefully. Because history will always compare what you do with what Ian Smith and his administration did. Never allow it to be said, Mwalimu said, never allow it to be said that Ian Smith was better than you. never allowed the Zimbabweans to be nostalgic about a barbaric regime. Govern well, Gabriel. Those were the words of Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere. And Zimbabweans will agree with me that in the first 10 years of Robert Mugabe's administration, when I wanted to buy a shirt, Harare was the place. The Zim dollar was the currency, not brand. Zimbabwe was the basket of SADC. And I remember at that time that it is President Robert Gabriel Mugabe and a Ghanaian lady called P.L.O, who are the winners of the African Leadership Prize. Then things started going south. I think things started going south even a little earlier with Gukuruhandi in 1985. And then things started going south when the farms were being seized, which nobody can quarrel about, but without much planning, some would say. And then the sanctions set in. And then we know that Zimbabwe has never been the same again. And I've said it before, that no matter how good a dancer you are, you must know when to leave the stage. Robert Gabriel, a great man, a great fighter, a great freedom fighter, did not leave the stage at the right time. And because he did not do that, Zimbabwe started going south. And Zimbabwean professionals started leaving the country. The international community, of course, in support of their cousins whose farms had been seized, also started punishing Zimbabwe. And when that set in with a combination of other things which you and me know, which are of an internal nature, including corruption, Zimbabwe has never been the same again. So there is a sense in which, even when I heard President Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa saying that upon coming into power, he would change Zimbabwe, I never believed it. Why did I not believe it? Why did I not believe it? I did not believe it because the fundamentals had not changed. If the fundamentals remain the same, no matter how well-intentioned you are, you cannot only achieve so much. The sanctions are alive and well. The economy is beaten. The infrastructure is beaten. The superstructure is beaten. The population and the mining sector is beaten. The manufacturing sector is beaten. The energy sector is beaten. The international community, the United States of America and European Union are still only insisting that you must fail. And internally, you are also not embracing the opposition, because I believe that when a country is besieged in the manner in which Zimbabwe is, the most important thing is that you have a government of national unity so that every hand is on deck. Easier said than done. So it is a combination of those factors, in my view, that continue to undermine Zimbabwe. And for that reason, the administration of President Mnangagwa, however well-intentioned it is, will never realize its intentions. That, unfortunately, is the case. It is unfortunate, but that is the case.
So, Professor, if you are to be in the same room with President Emerson Dambuzo Mnangagwa today, what advice would you give him? What would you say?
I'm very clear what I would tell President Mnangagwa. I would tell President Mnangagwa, call a meeting, an Indaba, of all the political players in Zimbabwe, regardless of their political affiliation. Have a discussion on what Zimbabwe must do to get out of the rut in which it finds itself, either by reasons that are internal or external. Form a government, a transitional government of national unity, which will be in transition for 5 years, whose only agenda is to revive the economy. And that particular transitional government of national unity, with an initial life of 5 years, with a possible extension of 5 years, is one that will govern. And that transitional government of national unity will agree, among other things, that party affiliation will no longer be significant. What is significant is the revival of Zimbabwe. That is number one. And once that transitional government of national unity has been put together, then you begin to look at the issue, agenda item number one. How do we deal with historical injustices? How do we deal with the land question in a permanent way? How then, number two, do we deal with the monetary situation which has collapsed? Number three, how do we deal with the economy? It's in a manner that will ensure that we deal with the job situation. Number four, how do we ensure that we negotiate with the world so that the sanctions that have been imposed upon Zimbabwe are eliminated? Once the sanctions have been eliminated, how do we deal with the question of energy and ensuring that we begin to have investment? Number five, how do we ensure that we exploit the talents of the Zimbabweans in the diaspora? And there are many of them in all fields. And number six, how do we begin to encourage the people of SADC to begin to work with Zimbabwe for the purpose of ensuring that we solve the problem both within the region and in the domestic arena? I believe that if I had that conversation with President Mnangagwa and that conversation were to be put into effect, then Zimbabwe would begin to move in the right direction. When a country is weak, you don't need anybody outside. Everybody must be in the arena, and every hand must be on deck, and everybody must be pulling in the same direction. Easier said than done. But the beauty of an outsider is that an outsider has the luxury of pointing to a householder that the cobweb which you thought was a piece of furniture is not a cobweb, is not a piece of furniture, but a cobweb. And therefore I can afford that luxury.
I just hope he's listening, or his people are listening, and he could actually take something from what you have said, Professor. But
he's an intelligent man.
We can only hope. Yes,
he's a lawyer.
Yes, he is.
And a freedom fighter.
Mm-hmm. We just hope that he, it's sad. The situation in Zimbabwe right now, it's very sad, and I just hope that he will do something. Anyway, just to go on with our question, somebody says, what will it take to achieve Mwalimu, Nkrumah, and others' dream of a United States of Africa? We have heard you talk about it. Do you have plans to engage like-minded young leaders, the likes of Malema, Julius Malema, Nelson Chamisa, and others, to make this a reality?
The beauty of this is that what is happening now is very beautiful. The good men and women across Africa are in conversation. Malema and I and Chamisa and others are in conversation. So that tells you that there is a confluence of ideas. And the beauty now with COVID, if there is any silver lining with COVID, is the realization by Africans within the continent and outside of the continent that we must now begin to work together. And I know for a fact that there are many organizations that are now moving in the direct. State 55 is one such organization, Esgadia, ADDI of Arikana Chihombori Kwao, who is a Zimbabwean, as you know, working with the diaspora. So the beauty now is that people are moving away from rhetoric. And people are beginning to do things on the ground. Those things may not be visible now, but I believe that by the end of the year, many Africans will see the footprint of all these efforts. And that will be the beginning. It is not for the faint-hearted. Just this morning, somebody made a comment in a forum where I was saying, if Africa cannot unite Somalia, how can it unite itself? And this was my answer. If the United States of America could grow from the 13 original states to 50 states and other territories, why shouldn't Africa unite? I believe it can be done. It is not going to be easy. And in fact, I dare say that the people who are going to stand in the way of African unity are active professional politicians. Because a politician who is a cabinet minister in a country A fears that when we have a bigger Africa, then there will be a small fish in a small pond and they will not survive. Those who are simply looking for positions will find that a bigger Africa is not a very comfortable thing. But I have no doubt in my mind that going forward, our strength will lie in our unity. It is not going to be easy. It may not happen in our lifetime, but if indeed it does, it's something that we ought to do. And you know, if you want to know that a good idea never dies, look at African unity. It started, the United States of Africa the idea started in 1897. The first meeting about it was in 1900. We have had 8 meetings about it. The chief high priest of it was Kwame Nkrumah when he was overthrown in 1960 and all his books were banned in Ghana. Who would have known that Nkrumah would make sense again today? Today, when we talk about African unity, you see how fresh Nkrumah's ideas are. See how fresh Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere's ideas are. See how fresh the ideas of Patrice Emery Lumumba are. And it's only 60 years since African countries regained their independence. If it takes another 100 years, why should we worry? Our role is to play our part. Africa will know unity. But we are not being naive in assuming that it will come easily. If it comes easily, well and good. But we must work at it. And voices such as mine, such as yours, such as Chamisa's, such as my good friend Julius Malema's, such as Cyril Ramaphosa's, such as many others. These are voices, Arikana Chihombori, and many others. These are voices that are simply contributing to an effort that is already on the ground.
And then someone says, ask a professor, how can Africa Union become a functional multilateral institution, and why the opposition politics in Africa stands as a failure when it comes to grabbing power constitutionally? Also, if Africa can make progress in bringing about constitutionalism anytime soon.
First of all, there are many people. Let me start with the African Union question. There are those who are quick to dismiss the African Union and before it to dismiss the Organization of African Unity as toothless bulldogs. And I always tell them that they may be toothless, but at least they are bulldogs. So what we need to do is to give them teeth, because these are institutions that exist. How can we work with them? How can we strengthen them? And there are a number of things that are now happening. If you look under the aegis of the African Union, we have initiatives such as Africa Agenda 2063, which is a plan that has been put together by the African Union. Of course, Agenda 2063 is not anything very new. If you are familiar with the Lagos Plan of Action in 1980, is a rehash of the Lagos Plan of Action of 1980. It is a good thing. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which was signed in Kigali, Rwanda in 2018, is also a useful tool. How do we strengthen all these? And in addition to the African Union, we also have to look at the regional bodies such as SADC, such as the East African Community, such as ECOWAS, such as the Central African Organization, such as the Maghreb, and such as IGAD. And I believe that if we work with them, then these are bodies that can be strengthened. And if we strengthen them from outside and we work with them and we work for them, ultimately, I think they will realize the things that we desire that they should realize for us. The other question is about opposition politics.
Yes.
You know, in the 1980s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1989, you permit me to say that prior to that, there was the bipolar world. African countries were either affiliated to the Soviet Union or affiliated to the United States of America or Europe. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it is the Westerners who won, and they told us that in order to have governance that is acceptable, you must have multi-party democracy. So we started with multi-party democracy in Kenya in 1992, in Tanzania, in Zambia, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Nigeria, in Ghana. And according to the Westerners' definition of democracy, democracy means multi-party politics. Democracy means that you must have periodic elections, and that those elections must have observers, particularly from Western Europe, and that you must have presidential terms, and that once you have that, you must also have NGOs. Once you have NGOs, then you must have human rights, and these human rights must be human rights as understood by the Westerners, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and of course, all those things. Then African countries started forming these things we call political parties, and we started competing. Then these political parties in many countries were not ideologically founded. Essentially, they were ethnically founded, except for a very few countries. Countries such as Tanzania, where you had a tradition which had been built once again by Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. You had Chama cha Mapinduzi. You had political parties worth their name in the former freedom fighting movements, such as found in SWAPO, or the MPLA, or ZANU-PF, or FRELIMO, and all these parties also, NRA, NRM in Uganda, RPF in Rwanda. The problem is that we had is that these political parties did not mature. In Kenya, for example, you'll find politicians who have been, in the last 20 years, they have been members of 12 political parties. And if you look at the freedom fighting movements, they have failed to transition from freedom fighting movements into political parties. The net effect, therefore, if you look at FRELIMO, it is inconceivable that FRELIMO can lose an election. It is inconceivable that CCM can win an election. It is inconceivable that ZANU-PF can win an election. It is inconceivable that an NRA, NRM can win an election, can lose an election. It is inconceivable that all these parties can lose an election. And even when they lose, they can't believe it. And because even the armies belong to them, the armies will tell you, you can have those votes counted in your favor, but we'll never leave power. So this idea makes it very difficult for constitutionalism, or rather for political parties and political power exchange as conceived in Europe to work in Africa, which then begs the question, what do we do? And before I come to what we do, it is not true that in a number of African countries, power has exchanged peacefully. In Uganda, I remember so very fondly when Kenneth David Kaunda lost elections and he accepted, and President Chiluba was elected. It is not lost on me that in Malawi, we had Bakili Muluzi win an election and it was accepted. In Kenya, there was also Daniel Arap Moi who was not there, but his party lost an election and it was accepted. We have also seen that in Ghana when President Mahama lost an election and President Nana Addo was accepted. In Liberia. So whenever we talk about Africa, we must also remind ourselves that there have been cases where power has actually exchanged hands in a peaceful manner, but we are still grappling, and the West and the media is fond of highlighting the negatives and de-emphasizing the positives.
All right, Professor, is there, do you sometimes find your profession clashing with the love that you have for your continent? The reason I'm asking is there are questions here. Someone asked why you defended a fraudulent 2017 Kenyan election results in court and called it mere grievances. There's also another question. I'll just read them so that you answer once. Ask him why he invited suspects he was investigating for corruption to a fundraiser organized by his foundation. And then when we leave Kenya, we go to Tanzania. Ask him why he recently endorsed President Magufuli, who is known to be intolerant to the press and opposition politicians. They get detained on false charges.
You know, sometimes when I listen to questions such as that, I sympathize with the questioners because they ask the questions on the basis of ignorance and lack of facts. Number one, who told them that the Kenyan elections were fraudulent? Who told them? That was a finding of the court. Anybody who asks such a question, first of all, does not know what the role of a lawyer is. Number two, does not know what law is, and does not know that a judgment is not equivalent to the truth. And the only thing you can do is to sympathize with such a person because he does not know what it is. It would, in the mind of such a person, the cases are predetermined. In my own view, I hold the view, and this is a view that I still hold, that the decision of the Supreme Court of Kenya in finding that the Kenyan elections were not properly conducted was the wrong decision. It must also be remembered that it was a decision that was arrived at on the basis of 4-2. It was not a unanimous decision, it was a majority decision. And in fact, the argument that we held on our side, I was presenting the Independent Electoral Commission, that in fact, the truth is that that particular position has been upheld in Nigeria, it has been upheld in Zimbabwe, and therefore I can only sympathize with such a position, with such a person who asks such a question. And number two, when somebody asks, for example, when somebody says that President Magufuli endorses, what does that mean? President Magufuli is running a government. President Magufuli is the president of the United Republic of Tanzania, whether you like it or not, whether you accept that he opposes the opposition or not. Who says that he does? Simply because you have read in a newspaper and therefore it is the position, that is misguided. And then the person asked that I invited somebody who was being investigated. I did not. The persons who invited them were different. I didn't run the school. They simply happened to be there. So sometimes, and this is, in my view, is the tragedy of people who, particularly those of them who find themselves in the social media, because they don't have the advantage of the facts. Then they are very judgmental. They are very quick to ask questions. If only they were patient and inquisitive enough and curious enough to ask relevant question, they would ask the right question. But what can one do? You can only sympathize with them. I'm one who is very slow. You'll never see me on Twitter, for example. You'll never see me insulting anybody on Twitter. I raise questions publicly, and even when I raise questions publicly, I do so in an agreeable manner, so that even when you disagree with me in an agreeable manner. But those who are quick to judge and quick to condemn, let me answer this question. If you are a Tanzanian, who do you deal with? Is it not the president of Tanzania, or you have another president? If you are Zimbabwean, who do you deal with? Is it not the president of Zimbabwe, or you have another president? So I sympathize with them, and sometimes because I'm spiritual, I also pray for them.
Thank you. Thank you for praying for us, Professor. And then there's also a question that someone wants to know if you have any knowledge about a country called Eritrea, about the country's struggle. about the country's struggle to be self-reliant and the struggle it has gone through?
I know that President Isaias Afwerki, who remains the president of Eritrea up to today, President Isaias Afwerki was one of the comrades in arms with the president of the former prime minister of Ethiopia, Meles Zenawi. And of course, you remember after the overthrow of the Deg regime of President Mengistu Haile Mariam, that is when Eritrea regained her independence. And Eritrea has remained a very close society. There was a war between Eritrea and Ethiopia, struggling about a border dispute, which was resolved only very recently. And it was resolved when we had Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia taking over in Ethiopia, and of course having a rapprochement with President Isaias Afwerki. It is a very closed society, and not many people know about what is happening in Eritrea. They do their own things. I remember only 1 week ago when they were given a donation of material for COVID from Jack Ma, they rejected those particular items. But it's a very closed society. President Isaias Afwerki has remained in power for too long, since the 1980s, and I think that has suffocated and has stultified development and growth in that part of the world. And one looks to the forward to the day when Eritrea will open up.
Professor, do you see Nigeria splitting into two or more, perhaps?
You know, there have been doomsday scenarios for Nigeria. There are those who have said many things about Nigeria, that Nigeria will split into three, into the north, into south-south, and into southwest and southeast. I'm not a doomsday scenario builder. I believe that Nigeria has our challenges, and I believe that Nigerians have the capacity and the ability to resolve those issues. I'm not unaware of the current attempts by people in what was described as Biafra to move away, but I'm also acutely aware that Nigeria is a country that is capable of welding together. Remember that this is a country that has had a civil war in the 1967, when President Yakubu Gowon was the federal president, and Odumegu Ojukwu, leader of Biafra, and the country came back together. You will remember that this is a country that has had coup d'etats. In fact, in 1967, these were the very first coup d'etat that was mounted by Kaduna Nziogo and then Aguiyi Ironsi, and a series of other coup d'etats with Gowon, Yakubu Gowon, with Abacha, with Buhari, and all these. So in a nutshell, I still believe that Nigeria and Nigerians have the capacity to resolve their problems and to ensure that there is a governance system that will make every Nigerian happy. It is not going to be easy. It is a problem that is extant, and is a problem that I believe can be solved, and the Nigerians have the capacity to solve it.
And let's rate President Muhammadu Buhari.
What?
Can you rate President Muhammadu Buhari for me? You've rated President Kagame.
President Muhammadu Buhari became, when he was the president during his first term, I think there was a sense in which he had great energy. He was young and vibrant. But the President Buhari that we now have is an old man.
Yeah.
Too many problems. Perhaps things have changed so very fundamentally, and perhaps the expectations that people had have not been met. And with the many difficulties that we now have, it has not been easy on him. And therefore, on a scale of 1 to 10, you want to go above 5 rather reluctantly, or because of the myriad of problems that he's faced with. You are faced with Boko Haram on one hand. You are faced with collapsing oil prices on the one hand. You are faced with COVID-19 on the one hand. You are faced with unemployment on the one hand. It is not easy.
So what is he supposed to do? If you're in the room with him now, what advice would you give him?
I would tell him, Your Excellency, you've served. Hand over the baton to somebody else. History will remember that you played your part. I think it is too late in the day. In any event, he's serving his last term. So he'll not be eligible for election during the next election.
But you know our African leaders, Professor. We
I know.
can say that.
I think that the Nigerian constitution is of such a nature that he can't seek another term. That I think is
Yes.
clear. And I think the Nigerians, like the Kenyans, have established that tradition now.
And someone asks that please, can you ask a professor his position on the common currency introduction of the ECO in some West African countries? Could it be used as a base for political integration of West Africa?
I think when the 14 African countries met and they made a decision led by Nigeria that they would eliminate all the currencies and have ECO, it was a very good move. Because one of the things that was going to happen was that, number one, the CFA franc, which was being used and being controlled from Paris, was going to be eliminated from the arena. And once you did that, you'll then have a common currency. And when you have a common currency, as we have learned from the European Union, what you want to do is you want to integrate your economies. If you remember what happened in Europe when Europe was integrating with the anchor countries being Germany at that time and France, one of the things that they did was to require the weaker economies at that time, and the weak economies meant countries such as Greece, meant countries such as Italy, whose lira was suffering. The Greek drachma was also suffering, and of course, the Spanish currency, the peso, was also suffering. So one of the things is that they had a checklist of what countries would do before they joined the Eurozone. The ECOWAS countries had agreed that the ECO would start to operate in the month of, or rather in the year 2020. I always thought that that was too ambitious, and time has proved me wrong. But in the intervening period, what has happened is that France went behind the back of the West African countries and persuaded President Alassane Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire. And you now have 8 countries adopting the ECO, but this ECO is not the ECO that was contemplated by the other countries. But if we go back to the ECO that was contemplated by all the other countries, then the truth is that ECO would have started being a very useful currency in the West African region, and it would have been one of the ways of integrating the economy in that region. In the same way that even in Kenya, rather in East Africa, the East African Community Treaty talks about first you have a common market, then you have a monetary union, and ultimately a political federation. And I think that is a very good thing. If we do that also in the SADC region, and you have your currency, even if it is pegged initially against the South African rand, which is one of the stronger economies, you can either choose, I think you'd choose the rand because South African economy is the stronger one. You'd choose the rand as against the pula. Once you do that, then you would begin to have 3 major currencies in Africa. And once you have 3 major currencies, then in another 50 years' time, you can now talk about a single African currency called the Afro, or whichever name that one can give it. And economic integration would be a good thing. And that is why I think that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which begins to operate in the month of July in Accra, Ghana, is a good move, because these are the economic fundamentals that we'll then have to begin to deal with.
And the Supreme Court in Malawi has today upheld the Constitutional Court's determination that the current president, Mutharika, was not duly elected in the past election. What is your comment on the ruling, and what message do you have for the Malawians?
Whenever there is an election and there is a dispute about that election, The arbiter is the judiciary. The judiciary has now made a finding that the election that was conducted did not meet the threshold. And it has now been confirmed by the Supreme Court that the threshold, the votes garnered by the President Mutharika, I think, was 38%, and they are now going back to the election. And it's not lost on me that, in fact, President Mutharika has already chosen his running mate in the person of Muluzi, and the other person has also chosen their running mate. That is what we expect. That is what we expect. And it's not, and I'm using this to answer again the question, and this must come out very clearly to Africans. The mere fact that there has been a finding that election was not properly held does not mean necessarily that it was right. It means that on the basis of the law, it did not meet the threshold. And President Mutharika, who himself is a professor of law, is now going back to the election. He has accepted the verdict. That is how democracies work. And that is as it should be. And then you don't accuse lawyers of having appeared on either side. Those people who ask those questions, when they are charged with murder the next time, will they not want lawyers?
But whilst we're whilst we are on that issue aspect about elections being rigged, Professor, I will take you back to Zimbabwe. The last election. What is your comment to that? Were the elections rigged?
I do not know whether the elections were rigged, because the finding, you see, the words rigged are words that you can use in the streets. The question, when you go into the proper forum, the legal forum, the question that the court asks is not whether the elections were rigged. The court asks, this is what the law says about how elections are to be conducted. Were the elections conducted in accordance with the law? The court will then look at the elections and all the requirements, and the court can arrive at any of the two findings. The court can make a finding. The court can make a finding that on the basis of the evidence before us, remember that a court of law acts on the basis of the evidence that is adduced before it. On the basis of the evidence, the court will say the election did not meet the constitutional threshold, or they met the constitutional threshold. And if they met the constitutional threshold, the court will uphold the elections. And if it did not, the court will nullify the elections. We have now seen that in Malawi. We have now seen that in Kenya in 2017. We have also seen elections being upheld in Nigeria. We have seen elections being upheld in Congo Democratic Republic. We have seen elections being upheld in Gabon. We have seen elections being upheld in Togo. We have seen elections being upheld in Sierra Leone. We have seen elections being upheld in Liberia. We have seen elections being upheld in Guinea-Bissau. That is the way it happens. So
Professor,
was it rigged? That is a finding of the court. Do the people believe that the elections? Yes, you want to ask the question.
But there is an issue. There is an issue, especially in Zimbabwe. There has been allegations that the justice system is also captured by the ruling party ZANU-PF. So if you say that it's based on the courts, what about that aspect that probably the justice system is captured by the ruling party?
Let me answer your question by giving a very small. This is a story. This is a statement that was made in 1960s in Uganda. It was a statement made by a young Ugandan minister trained in the Soviet Union called P.L.O. And in response to a statement that he had been made, that P.L.O. had made, this is what a respected Ugandan lawyer called Dan Wadada Nabudere said. When all is said and done, I agree with P.L.O. and all must agree with P.L.O. that there is nothing like independence of the judiciary. that the so-called independence of the judiciary is nothing but division of labor. I hope I've answered your question.
Can you repeat that? I heard it, but I want you to say it slowly.
This is what Dan Wadadana Budere said, that when all is said and done, I agree, and we all must agree with P.L.O, that there is nothing like independence of the judiciary, that the so-called independence of the judiciary is nothing but division of labor. And in many cases, it is true that the judiciary, because people who are in the judiciary are men and women, and sometimes they may have political affiliations, but there is also a sense in which judiciaries have shown that they can be independent. The Malawian judiciary is serving under President Mutharika. Have they not overturned an election? The Kenyan judiciary was serving under President Uhuru Kenyatta. Did they not nullify an election? So it can be done. So it is not always the case. The problem is that we have in Africa, I think, is that when we have a case in court and the case goes against us, then we think that justice has not been done. It does not necessarily mean that. And I'm speaking generally. And in many African countries, elections are sometimes not held in very easy circumstances, particularly for the opposition. In Zimbabwe, for example, when you have a freedom fighting party like ZANU-PF and an armed forces, which is essentially a ZANU-PF force, it is not very easy to win election. It is not easy. You may think it is, but the vested interests are too many. So you may shout all you want, but the generals can say, yes, you can win the election, but we'll never salute you. You are not part of us. What do you do?
So what's the solution then, Professor?
Remember, you asked me when I was in the process of answering the question what I would do when I advised President Mnangagwa. What did I say? That in situations such as that, what you want to do is to have a government of national unity. And once you do that, then you begin to even convert the armed forces into a national force, which is capable of accepting people, not even when they were not part of the struggle. Because there are those, even in the armed forces in many countries where the armies are transitioning from freedom fighters. They'll ask you the question, where were you when we were in the bush? Where were you? They ask. And when they ask, what do you say? You are not in the bush because you are not even born sometimes. And they keep on referring you to the bush.